The MoSCoW method is a tool that's used to help a team prioritize user stories. It's a technique for helping to understand priorities and ensure a common understanding across the different team members. The MoSCoW method is usually used by analysts and stakeholders when they're coming up with user stories or requirements for a project. It can help determine a clear set of requirements and a clear priority for those requirements by categorizing each user story. Once you establish which category each of the user stories falls within, you can determine which requirements are important, which aren't as important, and which can be excluded from the scope of your project. The first category in MoSCoW is must-have, which is the minimum usable subset. These are the user stories that must be included in order for us to go forward with releasing anything into production. The next category is should-have, which are the user stories that aren't critical but are still deemed important for the project. The third category is could-have, which are the user stories that would be useful and would add additional value to the project. And the final category is won't-have, which are the user stories that are explicitly excluded from the scope of this project. Sometimes we also think of these as the user stories that we would like to have in the future, but that we know for sure we will not have in this release. The process for rating user stories using the MoSCoW method is that we assign a priority letter of either M, S, C, or W to all user stories in our project. Once we've created a user story backlog, whether that's on a whiteboard or a wall or an Excel spreadsheet, the project team will then work through the map, take a look at the priority that's been assigned to each of the user stories, and identify or discuss any issues that may happen or may come up in discussion when they're looking at the priority. So, for example, some of the team members may have an opinion about what requirements may constitute a must-have or a should-have, but that may be categorized incorrectly as a could-have or a won't-have. If a team is using the MoSCoW method, we can actually use those categories to help us create our story map. So, for example, we'll use the M-ranked or the must-have stories to create our backbone of our story map. The M-ranked user stories are sequenced according to their themes and logical order of development to create that backbone. Once we have the backbone, we'll then take the S-ranked stories or the should-have stories and place them beneath the must-have stories. After that, we'll add the C-ranked and the W-ranked stories, which fall lower and lower on the story map. The W-ranked stories may actually be excluded from the story map if we know for sure that we're not going to develop them. Once we've arranged these in a story map, we can start to work through it and talk about the different issues that may relate to each of the user stories and each of the layers, and discuss potential issues with the team. Using the MoSCoW method is a way to start thinking about user stories in terms of must-have, should-have, could-have, and won't-have, and is a great way to identify the scope of a project and then create a user story map. In summary, the MoSCoW method is a tool that's used to help a team prioritize user stories. The 4 MoSCoW method categories include must-have, should-have, could-have, and won't-have.